Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full On Fulham, your Fulham-centric football podcast. This week, I'm not joined by anyone. Instead, I'm here to announce that Full On Fulham is expanding. We're going to try to bring you guys as much Fulham content as we can. With that in mind, for those of you who are aware of who I am, before Full On Fulham started, I was the creator of another Fulham channel called FFC&Me. FFC&Me was a show that sort of delved into why we're all Fulham fans, why we all love Fulham, and why people choose to support Fulham as their football club. We managed to interview quite a few really cool people for that show, and we want to sit down and we want to do some more of those interviews. So if you're interested in joining us for FFC and me on Full On, please email the show at fullonfulham@gmail.com. With the subject line of FFC and me, or send us a message on Twitter or any of the social media that we're on. And we'll look to book some people in for interviews coming up in the next couple of months. In the meantime, to sort of wet everyone's whistle to the show, for those of you who are unaware of FFCME or haven't seen any of our content before, we decided we're going to delve into the archives and release some of the older videos for FFCME, starting with this episode, where we sat down with David Diddy Hamilton and had a great discussion with his love for Fulham. We had loads of inside stories and sort of his time at Fulham, not just as the voice of match days, but also as a director and other times as just as a fan of the club. It was a really interesting sit down with David. So please enjoy the interview with him. We'll be releasing some more of these archive videos over the next couple of weeks, and then hopefully we'll have some new content at FFC and me for Full On Fulham out in the next couple of months. I hope you enjoy. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Ash. I'm doing fine and very much looking forward to the new season.
Yeah, me too. I'm extremely excited to have you on as a guest. For those who don't know who you are, living under a rock, I'd have to say, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a broadcaster. I've been broadcasting now for 60 years on radio and television, mainly radio these days, but sometimes television. And I've been a Fulham supporter since I was probably about 7 or 8. So that's quite a long time.
Obviously, most of us will know you as like the voice of Match Day before, obviously, you retired from doing that. Um,
Hmm.
how did you sort of get started with that? How did that come around with your broadcasting experience? I know, but how did you become the voice of Match Days at Fulham?
Well, it was something that sort of grew and grew. I mean, I'd been a supporter of the club, as I say, for a long time, going to lots of matches. And somebody who was working at the club at the time left. Somebody who was doing the halftime entertainment, and the Fulham asked me, would I like to do the halftime entertainment? So I said, yeah, great. So I went on the pitch, and sometimes we had guests, and we had little competitions, penalty shootouts and things like that. People were always dreaming up new ideas. And then that was the season that we were promoted under Mickey Adams. So the season that I started about halfway through that season. And at the end of the season, I was on the pitch and I was emceeing a promotion celebration. So that was a great way to start. Then during the summer, they said to me, would you like to do the announcing as well? So I said, yeah, why not? And I did it in the early days from what used to be a studio on the edge of the balcony of the cottage. It was not a very good, lovely though the cottage is, it wasn't a very good viewpoint because one goal was an awful long way away, and it was quite difficult, particularly on a murky day, to identify the goal scorers. So after a while, I moved down pitch side, and there were several dugouts on the riverside that were for disabled people, and they weren't all full. So I started off in one of those. And then I moved into the fourth officials dugout, and that became very entertaining, which I'll tell you more about later. But so I was in the fourth officials dugout, obviously with the fourth officials, usually somebody from Sky. And it was much easier there to spot the goal scorers and subs, of course, coming on and off. It was happening, right in front of me. And it was quite interesting because I could hear the industrial language on the pitch, and I could feel the tackles as they went in. A couple of times somebody sort of fell at my feet, while I was standing there with the microphone. And then the third thing that happened was they said, would I host one of the lounges with George Cohen, who, of course, was our World Cup hero from 1966. Lovely man, wonderful to work with. His reading of the game was just fantastic. And so that was the way the job grew, and it became pre-match, during the match, halftime, post-match. It became a whole package. And when Mohammad Al-Fayed came along, I enjoyed a very jokey relationship with him. There was a suit or maybe more than one suit, who decided to sack me for reasons best known to themselves. Apparently, I wasn't whipping up the crowd into enough of a frenzy, and I was making Fulham too friendly a place to come to. I was saying nice things and a warm welcome to the supporters of Norwich City. No, we don't want any of that. We want it to be tribal. We're not giving them a warm welcome. We want to beat them into the ground. So, I wasn't quite what they wanted. And so these suits sacked me. And the chap who took over me from me was a stand-up comedian. And he was a complete disaster. And at the time, Mohammad Al-Fayed had some dancers at halftime, you may remember, called the Cravenettes. He'd actually got them from West Ham, where they were I think they were the Hammerettes, and then he renamed them. It was the same troupe. So they did West Ham one week and us another week. And anyway, this guy who stood in for me, he decided to have some gay dancers, and he called them the Gavenettes. And Mohammad Al-Fayed didn't appreciate. One of them went up and tried to kiss him, and he didn't appreciate it at all. He said, get off me. So that was on a Saturday. On the Monday, I got a call from Harrods head office. Would you come and see the chairman in his office? I said, yeah, be a pleasure. So I sort of, in the back of my mind, I thought maybe they're going to give me my job back. Anyway, I went up there and into the boardroom. There he was with Mark Collins, who was another one of the Fulham directors. He said, what's happened to you? So I said, I've got the sack. So he said, well, he didn't ask me. I said, well, there you go. Anyway, he said, I want you back for the match tomorrow night. He said, what are we paying you? So I told him. So he said, no, we're not. And he gave me a rise. And he said, I believe you bought a season ticket. So I said, yeah. Well, I said, if I wasn't working anymore, I've treated myself to a season ticket. He said, how much did you spend on it? So I told him. So he left the room. So I said to Mark Collins, where's he gone? He said, I think he's gone to get you some cash. So when he came back, he gave me, some readies. And thinking of the cash for questions issue that had happened with, what's that chap's name? Neil Hamilton, wasn't it? I think. Yeah, politician. As he walked into the room, I said to him, I don't think I should take cash from you with a name like Hamilton. So he laughed and he said, fugging Hamilton. Why am I employing somebody called fugging Hamilton? I said, you're not. He said, yes, I am. You're back. And we'll give you a rise. And so that was it. That was the beginning of a very jokey relationship that I had with him. And after that, I would always introduce him to the crowd. You may remember this. I don't know another football club chairman that did this, but I would introduce him to the crowd before the match, and he would come round waving his Fulham scarf and waving to the crowd to, tumultuous applause. And he would always come over to me for a chat. And I had to hide the microphone behind my back because the things that he told me that he would do to the team if they didn't win were just, I think that it would have emptied the ground. I think it would have been outrageous, but he was such a character. And as long as he was there, he actually told me that. So as long as I'm here, you're here. He said, you've got a job for life. And in the end, it lasted 18 seasons. And I did do one season after he left, but I thought actually now he's gone, I thought it was a good time for me to go, really, because I had established a very good repartee with him and rapport with him, and I realised that with an absentee chairman who spent much of the time in America, I wouldn't be likely to do that again. By the way, I take away nothing from our chairman. I think he's done a wonderful job, and the Riverside stand looks absolutely fantastic. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward. I've gone on a free transfer from the Johnny Haynes stand back to the Riverside stand, back to my roots, and I can't wait for the Brentford game.
Yeah, I think for most of us who, I started coming to games myself in the early '90s, so I've grown up with your voice being like the match day voice at Fulham, and I was lucky enough to play at half time on one of the penalty shootouts when we played Lee RMI in the FA Cup, that infamous day where we just couldn't score for love nor money. So I had the joy of meeting you one time when I was a kid, sort of walking on the pitch and being quite pleased by that. And obviously, as I say, for most of us, you are sort of considered like the voice of match day. The younger fans now obviously have, Ivan Berry, who's doing a really good job as it is. But I think your voice for most of us is the match day voice.
Well, Lee
Let's
RMI, I remember that night. Didn't they have a fantastic goalkeeper?
Yeah, we couldn't score. That game could have
Yeah.
gone on for months. We wouldn't have scored a second goal, and it was just one of those games that it was destined for a replay.
I remember that goalkeeper. He
And
wasn't very tall. He wasn't very tall. He was about 5'8", and he just played out of his skin. And I think Kevin Keegan, if I remember rightly, was the manager, and he said he was one of the best goalkeepers he's ever seen.
It is
He just had
genuinely
a
one of the best goalkeeping displays I've ever seen. One of the best I've ever
he
seen.
just had a wonderful night. But well, that you can remember back. I mean, I remember back. You see, before I became the voice of Fulham, I was a director of Fulham back in the 70s, and having been a Fulham supporter since I was a boy, 1975 was a wonderful year. It was the year that we got to Wembley. Every match was played away from home. We didn't have one tie at home. And we got to Wembley. We won away at Everton, which I know we've just done again. But for many years, we never did that. Never won at Everton. It was a real bogey ground for us. And they stoned the players' coach. Their supporters stoned our players' coach after the match. We had to go through all this to get to Wembley. We won away at Man City with a goal right at the end from John Mitchell. I was on Radio 1 at the time, and I had a show that finished in London at 5 o'clock with a 7:30 kickoff in Manchester. And along with some pals of mine, we hired a Piper Aztec from not Heathrow, Northolt Airport. And we flew up. And on the way back, we were drinking champagne, and we were wearing the sick bags on our heads as celebratory caps after this incredible victory that got us to Wembley. And of course, I was there at Wembley in 75 when, unfortunately, the ball went through Peter Mellor's legs, our goalkeeper. And the famous quotation he said to Alex Stock, the manager, after the match, he said, "I'm sorry, boss. I should have kept my legs closed." Alex Stock said, "Your mother should have done that years ago."
Oh.
Great ad lib.
That's a bit harsh. Bit harsh.
Great ad lib, though, wasn't it?
Well, let's go back. Let's go back to the start. Obviously, about how you became a Fulham fan. Do you remember sort of how you came about to be a Fulham fan? Is it a family
Yes.
thing, or is it just
Yes.
how did you sort of start going to games and stuff like that?
Right. Well, my mother lived in Ranelagh Gardens Mansions, which is a block of flats just by Putney Bridge Station. And when we lived there, you could hear the crowd walking past on match days, the hubbub. And so eventually, of course, I wanted to know what it was all about. And my my parents were divorced. My mother's partner, he was a Liverpool supporter. And I think when they played Liverpool, he took me to the first match at Fulham. And what I remember was the ground was open on the riverside. There were just flags, and it was very cold. The wind whipped in off the river. And the magic of the cottage, you looked at this like a sort of cricket pavilion on the court. It always was a unique ground. And I think in those days they were playing in the old First Division, so it was the top league. And obviously playing teams like, Liverpool and Wolves and all the other big clubs at the time. So that's how I first went. And then in the 60s, I went to work in Manchester, so I missed a few years. And then when I came back, I started going again. And I started going, I think, first season I went, I've almost been a lucky omen for them, really, because just I mentioned earlier the Mickey Adams season, but going back to the 70s, first season I went, we won promotion. And we were beaten at home by Preston on the last match of the season, but we were already up. And I got a feeling they went up with us. So it was a bit of a more important for them than us. We sort of stepped off the gas. But then we had, a few years where we played in the lower divisions, and we were in the second division when we got to the cup final in 75. Interesting thing about that cup final, it's not that long ago, is it? 1975. Well, it probably is for you, but it's not for me. The West Ham team were all English, and the Fulham team were 10 Englishmen and 1 Irishman. There was not one foreign player in those two teams. That's how the game was in 1975. And the players were much more accessible. I got to know a lot of them very well. I mean, Les Strong, who captained our team that won promotion one season, is a very, very good pal of mine. And Alan Mullery and Freddie Callahan, George Cohen, they were all mates. And nowadays, you see players coming off buses with their headphones on, and of coaches, I should say, they've got their headphones on, and they're on their mobile phones, almost ignoring sometimes the fans who are there. It was very different. And I remember times too when we had Jim Stannard. Do you remember Big Jim? Or was that before your time?
I love Jim Stannard. Jim Stannard is one of my very earliest player memories. Is meeting Jim Stannard a few times. I love Jim Stannard.
Top man. Well, Jim Stannard and Terry Hurlock I used to go for a drink with them in the Fulham Road after the match. So they play the game, then you go there afterwards, have a few bevies, talk about the match. I don't think players drink nowadays, and they certainly don't socialise like they did then. So for the supporters, they were really magical times.
Yeah, I think it's one of those discussions that comes up quite regularly, especially when I speak to fans that are sort of over the age of sort of 35 and above. Access to players and how much it's changed. Because even in my lifetime, it's changed massively. I remember when I was a kid, the how easy it used to be to get players' signatures, or get photos of players pre-game. Even we used to stand right at the front of the Hammersmith end, and back then they used to have the big metal railings that were sort of at the front. You used to sort of lean through with your program and your pen, and players would come over and sign them, no problem. And I remember I used to get Jim Stannard to sign everything. I must have had his signature about 100 times as a kid, because it used to be so easy. And even after games, used to go quite regularly to the players' lounge and stuff that used to be on the old Riverside stand, and have access to them and their families there. You just would not get that now. It's completely you just wouldn't get that now. But I have a daughter who's 10 now, and she has tried to explain to her that her experience of football is completely different to how it ever would have been for me when I was her age, because the access to players has just completely changed.
No, the only person she's going to meet is Billy the Badger.
Yes.
But after the cup final and the disappointment of losing that, a couple of years later, I became a director of Fulham, and I had a pal who was on the board, and Ernie Clay was the chairman. And this pal of mine, who was just absolutely mad about Fulham, he lived in a flat overlooking Hyde Park. And I used to go up there occasionally for dinner. Every time he'd give me a Fulham shirt. And in the end, I had enough shirts for a team. And he was a director, but he was very concerned about Ernie Clay. And he felt that Ernie Clay probably wanted to build flats on the ground. So he wanted real Fulham supporters on the board, and he joined the board on the condition that they would have me as well. And you had to give the club a certain amount of money, and I'd just gone through quite an expensive divorce. I didn't have the money to give them, and I told him that. So he said, well, maybe you could do things for the club to raise money, like discos, club discos and things like that. So I said, oh, I can do that, which I did. And it was very interesting to be a director, because sometimes the more you know, the worse it is, really, because you discover, you don't just go there and enjoy the matches. You get involved in all the financial side of everything. And Fulham was the subject subsequently, about a year or so down the line. Fulham was the subject of an FA inquiry about illegal payments to players. And my friend and I, who were directors, asked to see the books. And Ernie Clay said, no, you can't see the books. So we said, well, how can we not see the books if we're directors of the club? And he said, well, you can't see them, and that's it. So it was obviously that it was a one-man dictatorship, and we had no say in running it at all. And I didn't see what the point was, really, of being a sort of figurehead director. So after 2 years, I resigned, and I went back to being a supporter, which I found was a lot more fun. Ernie Clay, who was the chairman, he was a rugby league man from Huddersfield. He didn't know anything about football. And we played away, when I was a director, we played away at Queen's Park Rangers. And Tony Curry, who's an England international, was playing for Queen's Park Rangers and scored a fantastic goal from about 25 yards out, just rocketed right into the back of the net. So I said to Ernie Clay, who I was sitting next to, I said, Ernie, that's class. And he said, bloody hell, he said, it could have gone anywhere in the ground. So I said, well, it didn't, did it? I said, it went in the back of the net. And I told Tony Curry that story years later. He thought it was hilarious. And he said, well, unfortunately, some of these people who get hold of football clubs don't know anything about the game.
I think that it's one of those things that I consider myself fortunate for it, but obviously it's not necessarily the case. When I first started going to Fulham in the early 90s, financially we was not in a great place. It wasn't. It was one of those things that, I remember giving up pocket money to donate towards saving the ground and stuff like that. Like things that most people that are fans of the club now, would never imagine that how bad it was financially in the sense of, there was literally fans doing jobs on match days to help matches getting put on, and there was, fans were said. My uncle used to sell away tickets because the club didn't used to have people to do that, so fans used to do it and then run it in. I remember some of my youngest memories were like him running into the cottage before games to run money up to the office that used to be at the top of the cottage, and then us going into the ground at the other and then people just would never imagine. One of the things that that I love most about the club is we always say it's a Fulham family, and it's one of those things that a lot of Fulham fans are really proud of. But older Fulham fans, they genuinely mean it, because when the club was in dire straits, everyone rallied around to make sure that we may not have been the best place, but it was surviving, and it was because of fans. And it's one of those things that we get it, and we don't really see that now, because we have very wealthy owners who put their money in there, put their money out to build 200 million pound stands, when and we just didn't used to see that. Obviously you would have seen that. You would have been at the club at times when we were in quite dire straits. And obviously, as you say, for you came in being an MC at the time when Chairman Mo then came in, and obviously we had the massive upward spiral since. So that must have been quite an exciting time to be working with the club, to see even just the way that Craven Cottage evolved since at your time there to what it is now. It's just a completely different planet.
Well, Jimmy Hill, I think, was the chairman when I I started doing the halftime entertainment, and I think it was he who brought Mohammad Al-Fayed in, and Mohammad Al-Fayed saved the club. I mean, there is no doubt that Fulham was in great danger of going into extinction. There was talk of a merger with Queen's Park Rangers, calling them Fulham Park Rangers, or something that nobody would have liked. I remember the 2 years when we went to QPR, and I was doing the announcing there, and uh, the spectators were incredibly close to the pitch, and it was a very different sort of area from the area that we know and love. And there were definitely people who had, I mean, it was prime site on the river for development. Look at the block of flats next door. You have another block of flats like that, maybe even better now, would be worth a lot of money. So it was Mohammed Al-Fayed. And then, of course, our new chairman, who, as you say, was in a different financial league from Mohammad Al-Fayed, and who's been incredibly generous to the club. And we are now a major player. We're in the Premier League, which is just fantastic. And last season was such an exciting season um, uh, under Marco Silva. You know. Whereas I hate to knock other managers, so I won't mention names, but sometimes when you had, passing sideways and backwards, it got a bit boring, but it's been much more attacking and really exciting and wonderful. I mean, another season like that, we'd take it, wouldn't we?
100%. I think for me personally, growing up, I was taken to football by my auntie Frida, who had been going to Fulham since the early 60s, and she always told us growing up that we may not have the best team, but we always play a certain brand of football that fans love to see. And it was always entertaining football. We love to see entertaining football. The quality might not be there, but the style we always like to see. And I think sort of growing up with that, and for me, obviously, I was extremely lucky in the sense of I remember Mickey Adams is the first manager I remember. That that team that he built that probably had no business getting promoted, let alone doing what it did. But it did, and it played great football. And then Keegan came in and brought a whole nother style of football that was was immense. And the signings that we managed to get done whilst Keegan was manager, obviously through some influence of him being a manager, took us up another level in style of football. And then obviously Ghana's football was just another planet of watching.
Sublime.
It
Mm,
was even I as a 10, 11-year old could just appreciate just how special that was watching. As
mm,
someone who loved watching football as a kid, not just like English football, I used to watch Italian football a lot as well. You know, just that football, even if you were not a Fulham fan, you could not help but love how great that football was. And I think
mm,
that we're talking about Silva. I think Silva's the first manager since Tigana, and that's no disrespect to any of the
mm,
managers in between, because I that the style of football is just absolutely incredible to watch, and I think I
mm,
loved watching that style of football. Obviously, we have some great managers in between, not even like never ever going to turn out how bad or how good football managers are. Look at Roy Hodgson and how much he's loved by absolutely everyone at the club.
mm,
He gave us that season of the most special football we're ever going to see. He got us to a European Cup final, which I never in a million years. If you told 9-year-old me when we were, just going up to the first division that you're going to see a European Cup final in your lifetime, I would
mm.
have laughed. So it's one of those things that it's just is special, and I think that we're hoping that this year could be good if we can keep hold of players and do what we want to do. Then it could be a special year, but who knows what's going on at the moment? It's one of those things until the transfer window shuts. We don't know what we're going to have in terms of putting on the pitch, but
Very difficult
hopefully
for
it'll be
managers,
okay.
isn't it? When you think you've got your pre-season, and then the players who are playing for you in pre-season may not be with you for long. Um, I don't know why the transfer window closes after the season has begun. I don't quite get that.
It's one of those things. I think it's one of this. It was brought in obviously to help clubs that start a season and then realise that they've got massive holes in their squads and what they need to fix. But it doesn't help a lot. Awful lot. It doesn't help clubs that start seasons well and then lose players. It's one of those things that, when you look at the pecking order of football, and we're quite lucky these days that we're probably slightly higher up than what we have been. That you know we will lose players to bigger clubs because they'll see talent and just come in and take it, and you can't do anything about it. But that is unfortunately modern football, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Lucky we didn't lose the manager. There are people after him as well. That's the problem,
Yeah.
is when you have success, people want your successful team.
Yeah, and we've seen that throughout, forever at Fulham, that as soon as you sort of get players that are doing well, that you lose them. It's one of the things that we often talk about, going back towards the 80s and sort of the 70s and the 80s. As soon as we sort of had players that were looking anywhere near promising, we often lost them. And it was just one of those things that, with the amount of players that you see that left the club and then rejoined the club. I was talking to Rob Wilson about it last year, about the team that come and went, who got promoted at Lincoln and played under Malcolm McDonald, and stuff like that, and how many players that Malcolm McDonald re-signed who had left Fulham in the years beforehand, that which was just, you wouldn't really see that now.
Yeah,
Um,
all these names you're bringing up, Malcolm McDonald and Kevin Keegan, you mentioned earlier. I'll tell you a story about Kevin Keegan. I used to walk my dog in Richmond Park, and when Kevin Keegan was the manager, one thing that the clubs used to do, probably don't do anymore, they'd have a pre-season run around Richmond Park, which is probably something like 7 miles. It's quite a long run, and it's hilly as well. And they've just been away on holiday, probably had a few sherbets and relaxed and put on a few pounds, and then they've got a run round Richmond Park. Anyway, I was there with my dog, and I could see the players, getting ready for the run. And as they ran round the park, Kevin Keegan ran in front of them, and he ran the whole way. He ran the team round the park. And I thought, my God, not many managers could or would do that. And what a form of leadership. You show him how it's done. He'd stopped playing, of course, by then, but he still ran, and they all followed him round the park. Fantastic.
I
Things
think
like
that
that really, really impress me, I have to say.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it, that when you look at that you always love to hear managers that do that. Kevin Keegan was always one of those managers that, he was one of the first managers that I remember that in my lifetime had played at the highest level. So it's a case of, when he's saying that he's expecting big things from you, it's because, he's not expecting anything less of you than he would have done himself. And as you say, hearing him that he's running a team around Richmond Park doesn't even remotely surprise me. It's one of those
Mm.
things that it would come naturally. When we do this getting to know you section, there's always a few questions I always love asking everybody,
Mm.
and one of them I'm actually quite intrigued to hear you answer, and that is, I always like to ask, what's the weirdest place or person who's a fellow Fulham fan that you bumped into?
Well, funnily enough, I bump into Fulham fans all over the world. I mean, wherever I go, I bump into them. I'm on a holiday somewhere, and somebody comes up to me and says, I'm a Fulham supporter. So every weird and wonderful place you can think of, I can't think of anywhere I've been that I haven't bumped into Fulham supporters. It's and of course it's great. We sit down, have a chat, talk about old times, depending on how old they are. Not many of them, of course, are as old as me, but so I go back a long way. But it's always great, whatever age they are, to talk to them, and I do bump into them everywhere.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why I started this show was because I always love hearing other people's stories. I always love hearing, one of those things about supporting a club like Fulham is that, we're not the biggest, and, not always the most fashionable team to support, because we don't, you get those fans that only really want to support clubs that win stuff. So there's always a reason why people fall in love with Fulham. And it's one of those things I always have it. So I'm always interested to find out, when people meet and wherever people meet other Fulham fans, because even I get it, on holiday in, Florida last year, I bumped into 5 or 6 different Fulham fans, and it was always great. One of the things that, I think that other clubs, bigger clubs, don't really get that feeling. When you bump into somebody else who supports Fulham and they go, "Oh, I support Fulham," and you get that,
Mm.
we have like an instant connection and something to talk about. Where I think bigger clubs get that. You wouldn't get two Man United fans randomly meeting and going, "Oh, I support Man United." So, okay, well, so does like half the other people in the room. Like, so it's one of those things that I think that you always find you bump into another Fulham fan, and then you automatically, oh, there's somebody I like already in this room. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, it is. It's a sort of worldwide friendship. I think one of the magical things about Fulham is obviously the ground and the setting. And there are so many new. I'm so glad that we did what we did, which is that we developed the old stadium. We didn't go for the idea, which was mooted down the years, of going somewhere else and having a new stadium. And, a lot of these modern stadiums have no character, but there is no ground in the country that has the character of our ground. The cottage, the Johnny Haynes stand, the river, the beautiful houses that surround it. And, I think everybody loves coming to Fulham. Quite a lot of people say it's their second club. And
Yeah,
not
I
many
think it's one
people,
of those.
not many people feel angry about Fulham. It's not a club that say, "Oh, I hate Fulham." You don't get an awful lot of that, except on match days, maybe. But generally, I think most people have an affection for Fulham.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones that unless you're support a local rival, people don't really have a bad thing to say about us, and it's partly down to the fact as a fan base, we're not the most aggressive, we're not the most
No.
hostile, and I've had many times in my life, on a match day walking through Bishop's Park between Putney Bridge Station and the ground, chatting to away fans and having lovely
Mm.
chats about football, and very rarely do we hear anything bad to say about us. I know some people cringe at that. They don't like hearing the fact that we're very friendly as a fan base. But it's one of the things that I've always been extremely proud of being a
Mm.
Fulham fan you know who that we're not hostile in the sense of we're not aggressive and rude to people, and that I think that it's something that we as a club should be quite proud of, the fact that you know it's one of the charms of supporting the club, isn't it?
I think for many years we won the award of the best behaved supporters in the top division. I don't know if that's still going, but I remember when I was there year after year, we won that. And I think it was something to be very proud of.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, and then one of the last questions I love to ask is, I always ask everyone in the get to know you is, do you have any match day superstitions? Is there anything that you do on a match day that, as a superstition towards the game?
Not really, but during the cup run that we had in 1975, my son came along with me to a lot of the matches, and he had some lucky socks. And he wore these lucky socks, or that people used to say to him, "Have you got your lucky socks on?" And he'd show them. So I can't remember what they look like now, but certainly he had lucky socks. But no, I can't think of one that I have. No.
Do you remember any sort of, in your time being sort of by the sidelines, any of the players or managers have anything that they would do that was a bit different, or was it more just a case of business as usual with everyone?
Well, the managers were all very interesting. You got to know some of them better than others. Obviously, Roy Hodgson. I suppose we were the same sort of age group, really. But I really liked Roy. I thought he was very Fulhamish, and I thought everything about him was right for the club. He was a gentleman, but he could be tough with the players when he needed to, and he could hit them with some strong language if he needed to. I also got very interested in the away managers and some of their behaviour. And somebody who amused me a lot was Stuart Pearce, who I think at the time was the manager of Manchester City. And he gave one of his players a terrible bollocking, and he looked quite sheepish towards the dugout to me and the fourth official and the Sky bloke who were in there. And he walked over to us and he said, "I've tried being nice, but it doesn't work."
I think it's one of those things. Obviously, when you talk about Roy and the way that Roy manages that, you know, I bumped into Roy a few times when been coming to games since he stopped being a manager.
Mm,
Walking through Bishop's Park, and he's just the most lovely guy, isn't he?
mm,
And
mm,
he's one of those things that I think he emphasised Fulham an awful lot, in the sense of,
mm.
you could his knowledge and his passion were just unbelievable. And I think we saw this weekend, didn't we? That at Sheffield United, that he's not
he's not too unknown for having a bit of a turn of standing up for himself. So,
Yes.
we saw that. So,
yeah, had a run in on the touchline with one of their players.
yeah.
Which you would think was a bit out of character. But no, I think Roy could do that when it came to it. But I think basically he's a very decent man. And he'll never be forgotten at Fulham for everything that he did for our club. And the season that we avoided relegation with Murphy's goal, Danny Murphy's goal, header, wasn't it, at the end? Was it how we stayed up? I mean, we were so adrift. We'd only just managed to get a result up at Man City before that, and then that one. And of course, then Roy was able to build his own team and lay the foundations of our wonderful European trip. And I'm sure you enjoyed every moment of that. I'm sure you went to Hamburg.
I didn't, unfortunately. It was at a time when I was out of work at the time and I didn't have a passport and I couldn't afford to buy one. So it was one of those that I missed. I did all the home games. It's the same as I was the Great Escape year. I did every single game home and away except from that Man City game because I was at a family wedding. So it was one of those. But I think Roy Hodgson, he's quite effective for those of us who are younger than him, which is a vast majority of people. He's quite affectionately known as Uncle Roy, and I think he will stay being known
Uncle
as
Roy. Uncle Roy.
Yes, Uncle Roy, because he is, And I now live in Croydon, and I know an awful lot of Crystal Palace fans who, he is obviously a Palace fan from being sort of from the area, but who love him just as much as we do for that exact reason, because he's just great.
Well, we've been lucky to have the great managers that we've had, and including the present incumbent. We're very lucky to have him.
Yeah, we are. We exceptionally are. We're gonna move on to the next section of the show, which is obviously your top threes. The first section is, what do you remember your top three favorite Fulham goals that you remember seeing?
Well, my favorite Fulham goal has got to be Clint Dempsey's goal against Juventus in 2010. Remember, we needed to score 4 goals in that match, and that was the 4th goal, and it went in the 82nd minute, and the roar from the crowd was the biggest roar that I've ever heard at Creighton Cottage. And I do remember the dark days of playing Hayes at home in the FA Cup and losing to them, and going home on a cold and freezing and rainy night and thinking, what are we doing? I think playing in front of about 4,000 people, but a capacity crowd, and that wonderful goal. It was unbelievable. The whole year was just fantastic, but I think that was my favorite goal. Another favorite goal was one that Alan Mullery scored. I think it was against Leicester. And Alan Mullery, of course, was a midfield player, but he had an enormous shot on him, and it came from probably 35 or even more, 35 yards or further out, and just rocketed into the back of the net. That was a great goal. There were some great goals on our cup run too. In '75, Les Barrett scored a great goal up at Carlisle, which was a vital goal. And Les was a terrific winger. When I played football in the Showbiz 11, I tried to be like Les Barrett, but nobody was like Les Barrett. He was like a kind of unsung hero. Be before your time, I think, Ash, but senior Fulham players would remember him. He was the archetypal winger. He'd be like a hare down the line and then get the crossover for the big man in the middle, but he could score goals as well. And that was a vital goal at Carlisle. So that would be my top 3 goals.
Luckily, I do actually remember Les, but obviously not playing for Fulham. He used to own a flower shop near Elsfield train station.
He did. He did.
And I'm from Elsfield, so
Yes.
I grew up in the area. So I was very lucky that my auntie Frida, who used to bring us to games, used to speak up to him about Fulham football all the time. So
very shy man. He was very shy, but I played in his testimonial match at Fulham in a kind of celebrity 11, and I must tell you about my playing career. this will come as a shock to you. I was not a professional, obviously, but I played in a lot of charity matches, and I played in Les Strong's testimonial match and Gordon Davis. But the biggest thrill of all was about 6 or 7 years after England won the World Cup. Alan Mullery had his testimonial at Creighton Cottage, and he had the England World Cup team from 1966 bar 2. And he said to me, look, I'm not going to get a couple of other professional footballers, but, you know, would you like to play in the England World Cup team? So I said, oh, well, I said, actually, I think I'm watching television that night, jokingly. Anyway, I wore the number 7 shirt, and I ran out in the red and white strip that England wore for the World Cup, and I played alongside Bobby Moore, Bobby Charlton, Gordon Banks, and just about all the team. And we played against an ex-Fulham 11. And I had a press cutting in the Fulham Chronicle that said England scored first when Bobby Charlton gave a fine ball to David Hamilton. No, Jack Charlton gave a fine ball to David Hamilton, who crossed for Bobby Charlton to rocket it into the back of the net. So I've got that, and I've showed it to people and said, when did you play for England? I said, I said at Creighton Cottage. In what would be probably about 1972, something like that. Yeah. So I thank Mullers for that. It was, usually in a dressing room, you get a bit of banter, but I have to say, in the dressing room on that day, unusually for me, I was pretty quiet. I just listened and learn.
Yeah. You're not really going to be able to say much to
no. I kept my opinions to myself.
You're not like to say to Jack Charlton, you need to pass the ball a bit more, are you? So
no, Jack Charlton wasn't a man that you would say anything to. He was part of that Leeds team who Norman Hunter, Billy Bremner, Johnny Giles. I mean, they're a pretty tough team. So yeah. He was part of that team, so, and he was big, wasn't he? He was huge. He was 6'3". Yeah. But anyway, that was one of the thrills of my life.
We're going to move on to your next set of top threes, which is, I know it's kind of hard because not everyone's sort of into football kits this way, but it's your top 3 favorite Fulham kits, and these could just be down to moments you remember playing in them. But are there 3 Fulham kits that you sort of remember?
Well, actually, we've had some pretty naff away kits from time to time. There's only one kit that Fulham should play in away, and it's very simple. It's all black. It's a great looking kit, and if you can't play in white and black, then play in all black. That's my favorite Fulham kit. I think it looks great. And I think we had some good results playing in all black too, like the All Blacks. So that's the only one. But you think of some mauves and some pretty awful. I know it's all about money, but I don't like it actually when teams change away and don't have to. I understand that if you're a team that play in white and black, you can't do that at Fulham. You've got to play in a different color. But say you play in red, which is the best color, isn't it? I mean, red is most of the successful teams have played in red. You look at Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, because red is an outstanding color. And if you ever look at a football pitch and there are red players and there are white players, there are always a lot more red players, it seems, to the naked eye, because it's such a stunning color, and England won the World Cup in it as well. So yeah, I think if we're not playing a team who are in, I think we could play in red because it's such a great color. But probably if not, then definitely all black.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We'll move on to the next section anyway, because this is one of my favorite ones that I wanted to speak to you about, which is obviously your top 3 favorite Fulham games. Now, obviously, we spoke a few minutes ago about FA Cup finals and stuff like that. So I'd be quite interested to hear what your top three favorite Fulham games are.
The semi-final at Main Road when we got through to the cup final in '75, and I went into the dressing room after. I've got a picture somewhere of me with Alan Murray and John Mitchell, who scored the goal, and a couple of the other players celebrating after the match in the dressing room. Couldn't do that today, so that made that extra magical. I think the one I mentioned to you earlier, the Juventus game, which Clint Dempsey scored that goal. I mean, just for the atmosphere that night and all of that run, all the games on that run. The Hamburg game, I would probably remember for all the wrong reasons. But I went there as the voice of Fulham, and before the match, they said to me, "Will you warm up the crowd on a cherry picker in front of the Fulham end?" So I'm not very good at heights. I don't like heights very much. Anyway, I went up on this cherry picker and warmed up the crowd and announced the Fulham team to them. So obviously big reaction. And in the cherry picker with me, there was we're very high up, by the way. I mean, almost to the top tier of the stand at Hamburg. So in the cherry picker with me, there were two German men. One was the operator of the cherry picker, and the other one was a cameraman who was panning the crowd and occasionally taking shots of me. So it was very cold. It was a cold night, and right up on this, I felt really cold. So I said to the operator, I said, "As soon as I've announced the team, let's go straight down. Don't hang around any longer than we have to." Excuse me, any longer than we have to. So I'd go for the last name, Subs, and I said, "Right, let's go." So he pressed a button, and the cherry picker shuddered like this. And I looked down to the ground, the drop. One end of it was open, by the way, wide open. I mean, like this cage. I thought, Christ, I hope these guys don't remember the war, these two Germans I'm in this with. Anyway, I don't think we're moving. So they start speaking to each other in German. Achtung, Achtung, and he presses it again, and it shakes a bit more, and about 3 times, and it doesn't move. And I thought, God, we're stuck up here. And not only that, but we're in the blocking the view of the Fulham crowd when the teams come out. And 1 or 2 people are starting to shout things at me like, go forth and multiply, in other words. And I thought, well, I can't jump off. So I don't know how we're going to get down. In the end, they operated the cherry picker from the ground, and it lowered. And I got off it, and I realized that my legs had gone completely. They'd gone to jelly with the nerves of the whole thing. And I had to walk in front of all the Fulhams smiling away as I was fine, and go back to my position where I had the microphone. But so that was a memorable night, but probably for the wrong reasons. And of course, sadly, the wrong result. And the shame of it was that we played so well in all the rounds. But on the night, a bit like the cup final in '75, we just disappointed on the night.
I think that for me as a fan, as a younger fan, that I wasn't born to see '75 in the cup final, but I used to hear stories about it non-stop as a kid. Not just from family members, but from whenever you would go to the ground and you would meet a fan who was old enough to be there, you'd always hear stories about it, and I've always loved hearing stories about it. And I think that I have bombarded my daughter and about stories of the games leading up to the final and just how that was. That whole cup run, started from the early qualifying rounds to even just to get out of the group. We shouldn't have got out of our group, let alone then went and beat the holders of the cup competition and the favourites. 3 rounds of playing the favourites. To beat Juventus was just immense. For me, as I said earlier, I grew up watching Italian football as well as English football. And Juventus are the team that I followed as a kid. because they were the team that they were the biggest team in Italy. To play against them, to even be on the same pitch, to be equal to them, let alone beating them in the fashion that we did, was just mind blowing for me. And then the Hamburg semi final was just, Petric went and scored that absolutely astonishing free kick against us. And it was one of those ones that as soon as that went in, I remember turning around and speaking to my cousin and be like, well, that's that then. They're scoring goals like that. That's that. And then obviously we had other plans, and the whole year was magical. And it's one that, again, we have Roy Hodgson to thank for that absolutely immense season. The players who played in that team are probably going to go down as legends for anyone who was old enough to remember them, because it was just so special.
It was, yes. I brought out a book a little bit later called A Fulhamish Tale, and I did a chapter on that European run, and yeah, I mean, it's there forever, embedded in our memory forever. Who would ever think that Fulham would be there, particularly if you remember the leaner times? There may be some newer supporters, younger supporters who thought, crikey, it's going to be like this all the time now. But those of us who've been around a lot longer knew that there had been some very lean years, and that's what made it all the more magical.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier on. If someone had told 6-7-year-old me who was watching us lose at home to, watching us lose at home to second division teams, that in 20 years' time you're going to be watching Fulham play in a European Cup final, I would have laughed in their face. There's no way I would have believed them, because I would have been closer to believing that there would be no Fulham than us playing in a Europa League final, for sure. Because it just seemed like it was never stuff like that would never happen.
Well, the whole Fulham story is a wonderful story, and as I say, a club that nearly went to oblivion, to coming back and being now a major player in probably the finest league in the world. So yeah, we should all consider ourselves very lucky and very happy. And now we've got a great new stand. I've just seen a book about it. I can't believe it. And it's showing about how the development happened, the building happened, and everything. I'm going to be very, very interested to see it at the first match. And I don't know where I'm sitting yet, so that'll be a nice surprise. I hope it's not too. I don't have too many steps at my age. Have to keep that in consideration. I'm no longer an active player.
And I think it's one of those things that it's the same thing when you look at the stand, and those of us who remember the cottage. I remember it in the early 90s, and it had been developed a little bit by then, but who'd seen the state of the ground even in the 90s to compared to what it is now. It is otherworldly. Other than the toilets in the Hammersmith end, I think absolutely everything else has changed. The toilets in Hammersmith end are the only thing that haven't. It's one of those things that the ground is just on another planet compared to what it used to be, and that Riverside stand is so impressive to look at.
Well, I was looking at it last season from Johnny Haynes. So this season I'm going to be looking at the cottage, Johnny Haynes, and the Hammy End, and everything. I must say that during my 18 years that I was the voice of Fulham, it was a golden time, because we had 3 promotions. We had our longest ever run in the top division, and we had a European final. So on my last day, they gave me, which I've got somewhere here in my studio, they gave me a ball. It's ceramic, I think. It would be ceramic, maybe. And it says on it, to David Hamilton, 18 glorious years. And they gave me a Fulham shirt with 18 on the back of it for the 18 years that I did as the voice of Fulham. I have to say, you were mentioning Ivan earlier and what a good job he's doing. Much more difficult now, because in the early days when I did it, you could inject some humor into it, which was great. And you were allowed a lot more personality. Towards the end of my time there, it became a lot more corporate. And there were things that you were asked to read out that were selling stuff. I mean, I understand that the game has moved on, but to give you an idea of the sort of fun that we had, you remember very well Simon Morgan. I was on his testimonial committee, his testimonial season, probably the last testimonial there will ever be at Fulham, because with the money that players earn nowadays, you don't need that anymore. But Simon was just the end, really, of the last century. And the change happened, really, as we got into the new millennium, when, we got into, I think you would agree, silly money, got into really silly money. But anyway, in his season, we earned Simon £100,000, which he was very happy to have. There are, of course, players now earning that in a week, but different ball game now. Anyway, Simon, in his testimonial season, didn't play many matches. He was always injury prone, although he played a lot of games for Fulham. But he did come on in the last match of the season as a substitute. And in those days, we used to have a man of the match, which I announced, about 10 minutes before the end of the game, 5-10 minutes before the end of the game. And it always came via people in the corporate lounges. And somebody from the club would hand me this piece of paper, and I would think, are you joking? You want me to announce this to the crowd, that he was the man of the match, when there was somebody else that was obviously, had a much better game. And 9 times out of 10, they seemed to get it wrong, and I had to read it out to derision from the crowd. And the man of the match is, they would go, no idea. And I was quite embarrassed about it. Anyway, I think this was the last time I ever did the man of the match. And Simon Morgan came on for the last 15 minutes, during which time he ran up and down a bit. And I think he took one throw in. Anyway, I made him the man of the match. The corporate people had given me some other name, and I thought, sod that. No, I'm going to have a laugh here. So I said, and Fulham's man of the match is number 10, Simon Morgan, whatever number he was. Simon Morgan. Place erupted. Yeah, great. Because he'd had a fantastic season, and they could see the humor of it. It was a joke, and Simon laughed himself. And you couldn't do that anymore. They don't have a man of the match anymore. But it was coming to a time when humor and personality were coming out of it, and it was becoming much more serious and much more corporate. And that's when the time came, I think, when I thought, I think it's getting very cold in the dugout in the middle of winter. I was freezing my nuts off in the dugout, and having more trouble identifying the players. As you get older, your eyesight's not as good. And I remember one time Andrew Johnson scored a goal. Well, I thought he scored a goal, and it looked like a really good goal from where I was in the dugout. And I said, Fulham goal scorer, number 9, Andrew Johnson. And nobody cheered. And then I saw the goalkeeper taking a goal kick. And I realized that the fourth official had flagged for offside, which from where I was, it was difficult to see. So I just opened the microphone and I said, oh, sorry, wishful thinking. And people laughed. So, it was wishful thinking that he'd scored a goal. But now that would probably be almost a kind of sackable offence, So, most of the time I did it, it was great fun.
We're going to move on to your last set of top threes. Now, I expect this one's actually going to be quite hard because it's your top 3 favourite moments or memories. So these are moments that they're not necessarily games, but they're just things that happen around the club that you remember so fondly as a fan. So I know it might be hard to give us the top 3, but give us something like your top moments and memories at Fulham.
That we haven't covered already, because we've covered, really, haven't we? Great goals and great moments. And well, of course, probably the first time I went to Fulham as a boy, standing behind the goal, and everything's so big, but you're near the goal and you could almost touch the players. I think that going to my first match, and having fish and chips on the way home, and in those days we had the Pink 'Un, the classified newspaper, at 6 o'clock. That would amazing. It was delivered to Fulham High Street an hour after matches finished, and it would have the results, the tables. How did they do it? on Saturday match days. So as a boy, obviously that was all, you know, very, very magical. I think obviously playing there, playing on the hallowed turf, the club that I supported since I was a boy, and to put on the Fulham strip and run out in charity matches there, and then to play in the England strip there, with the England World Cup team. That was a really magical night. So that would have to be two. And I think the third one was probably Fulham being at the cup final, the one and only time, and being at the old Twin Towers, you know, that wonderful stadium. And but I tell you what was another magical one, actually, now I think of it, was when we won the playoffs at Wembley. And some friends of I took a box there. We had a box with Fulham supporters that I'd known for many, many years. We decided to club together and we had a box at Wembley. And then bumping into the Fulham supporters on the Fulham way, especially after the match when we'd won, you know, going to Wembley and winning, that was terrific. And chatting, lots of them coming up and chatting to me on the way to the tube and on the tube coming back into town. It was more exciting, really, to win promotion in the playoff at Wembley than to go up automatically. That was a really, you must have been there. Great day.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me, the win at Wembley, you know, is you go back. We'll think of the Tigani year, especially. So it was like the first time getting up to the Premier League. It was for me, you know, my dream as a kid was to see Fulham play against, you know, Premier League teams, and we'd seen them, you know, perform quite well in the previous seasons going before we went up. You know, think of Villa in the FA Cup when, you know, that Simon Morgan game, talking to Simon Morgan. And then, you know, the Man United FA Cup game, the year that we went up, where we lost 2-1, but we played so well and made like such a good credit of ourselves to go up. That whole season of being promoted under Ghana was special, but nothing compares to that Wembley day. You know, you think of the white wall and how special that was, just to be a part of that as a fan. All the emotions of a football fan in 90 minutes, which just heightened to a level that I cannot explain to anybody. That second half felt like it was 2 hours long, especially after, you know, Dennis Adoy got sent off. It was just so, you know, I went through so many emotions that day that when I got home in the evening, obviously helped by the fact that I'd had a few celebratory drinks, I was just an absolute wreck. It was just one of those that going up at Wembley was the most special day I think as a football fan you're ever going to have, because it was just so immense.
You're talking about Manchester United. I remember another great day when we beat Manchester United at Craven Cottage, and I was featured on Match of the Day. At that time, Match of the Day used to do a feature on celebrity supporters, and that was my match. And of course, the fact that we won made the whole feature, you know, so much better. And I think they played Robbie Williams, Rock DJ or something. That was the music that they played. But yeah, that was great. Fergie wasn't too happy, of course, but he never looked happy at Fulham. I think he didn't like the dressing rooms much. Too small for him.
No, they were too small for him.
Yeah.
There's obviously there is one thing that before we go on to do our last bit, which is our Cult Hero Hall of Fame, there is one thing that obviously we briefly spoke about before we started recording, but I would love to speak to you about it, which is obviously you are inducted into the
Yes.
You are forever Fulham Award recipient, which is obviously, you know, it's just such a special thing in terms of being acknowledged by the club. And I think that, you know, that doubtless going to be very few people that would argue you being in there, especially those of us who remember. What was that like? What's it like to receive, you know, forever Fulham Award and get recognition from the club, you know, for everything you've done for the club?
Yes, it was lovely. I had a call from David Daly, who is the director, who is the link really between the club and the fans, but also the person who gets all the ex-players along. And usually it's for people who've played over 100 games for Fulham. And but once a season, they have somebody who hasn't done that. And this particular last season, they decided they were going to give it to me. So it was lovely. So I went along and took my wife along. It hasn't been to too many games. She tended to go shopping on Saturday afternoons when I went to Fulham. So good arrangement that we had for a long time. But she did. I remember her seeing Kevin Keegan playing for Newcastle, who did come a few times. But anyway, we had a lovely lunch in the cottage. And then at half time, went down onto the pitch and chatted with Ivan and got the award and walked round and waved to all the fans and got a very nice reception. And I was, very thrilled that they did that for me, and very, very touched. Yeah, it was nice. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I've got the little award here in my studio.
I think that, for those of us who have been going to football, from the 90s onwards, obviously when you were doing it, you're very much a worthy winner of it, because I hear your voice even now. If I hear your voice on the radio, I'm automatically transported to being in my seat at the cottage getting ready for a game. So it's one of those things that, for someone like me, I hear your voice, but I do encompass you in with what it's like, going to a match. So it's special in that way. So I'm glad that you received one.
Yeah, I get a lot of messages from Fulham supporters to my show at Boom Radio, and so obviously, often give them a mention, and I often mention the club and the supporters. So it's always great to hear from them, and they turn up as I said to you earlier, in the most unlikely places. You bump into Fulham supporters. So we're a little band of, well, not such a little band, we're a bigger band now. And it's a very, very special football club. And I think I was very lucky that I chose it at such a young age and have followed them for so long.
We're going to move on to the last section of our show, which is the FFC&ME Cult Hero Hall of Fame, which is slightly less prestigious than the Forever Fulham Award. So far this season, we've started a new Cult Hero Hall of Fame, and we've only had one entrant so far, which was Sean Davis. But David, do you want to give us an entrant into the FFC&ME Cult Hero Hall of Fame?
Well, I think it has to be Les Strong, who is a very good pal of mine, and I got to know him well when he was a player. He now hosts one of the lounges at Fulham, so he's still very much involved with the club. He captained the team that won promotion, and he and I had some very, very funny times together. And I'm going to tell you a funny story about him. When George Best was playing for Fulham, and I was a director at the time, and Ernie Clay had said to me, now you're a director, you don't fraternize with the players anymore. So Strongy said to me one day, he said, "You become very stuck up since you became a director." He said, you don't talk to your old pals anymore. So I said, well, the chairman has told me that I mustn't fraternize with you. So he said, that to him. He said, "We're your pals. Remember that." So I said, "Oh, fair enough." Anyway, we played away at Crystal Palace in a match at Crystal Palace. It was a lunchtime kickoff, and I think we won. And I had a drink with Les at the bar, and George Best was playing as well. And I said to Strongy, I said, "As it happens, Les, you had a good game today." So he said, "It was funny you should say that." He said, "Because Bestie and I were out on the piss last night," he said, "and we pulled a couple of birds." He said, "and to be honest, I don't think we got any sleep all night long. And when we kicked off at 12 o'clock, he said, I think we were still pissed." So I said, "Well, as a director of the club, my advice to you is this. If you can play like that on a Saturday afternoon, make that your regular training on a Friday night."
Something you would not get away with now as a professional footballer, that is for sure. Let alone as someone who is a director of a
doesn't
football
that
club.
show you how the game has changed? But Yeah, Strongy is a great character, you know, very funny, and he was a very good footballer. Played many. He's in the top 10 of appearances for Fulham, I think. So Fulham legend, and your cult hero number 2.